Good morning, gentlemen. Mr. O'Brien, what do you say we do a little review for Chapter Two's test? Democrat in name only. You might remember that Adolf Hitler and his cronies had a very ill-advised putsch against the government of Munich, and that didn't work out so well. Hermann Goring, his best friend, got hurt, took a bullet in the groin, became a drug addict because of the pain for the rest of his life. You might remember the story about one of his followers actually stepped in front of the volley by the loyal army, and he had a member take a bullet. And the entire story about Adolf Hitler could have ended that day during the Failed Beer Hall Putsch. But I digress. So anyway, so remember the idea of the Reichstag as you read these stories. The Reichstag is like the equivalent of the United States House of Representatives, and the Reichsrat would be the Senate. So Hitler realizes that he's going to have to try to take power by using legal means, and he's going to go after the rich industrialists, the intellectuals, and now he's going to go over the people of power. When he first tried to take over the government and the beer halls, he went with the poor, the disenfranchised soldiers, the down and out. So now he's looking toward the rich. But the Nazis don't do so well. If they're lucky, they get 2.5% of the vote. All right. And as we look through the charts here, we see that the Nazi Party was very slow in getting their legal rise to power. And the Reichstag, it was a struggle. But little by little, as we look through the chart from 1919 all the way to 1938, they began to get the majority. And when they get the majority, they're going to have to compete with not only the communists, but the social democrats. Now remember, the communists are on the left, and the social democrats are on the right. So the whole idea is that once they take over the Reichstag, and Hitler becomes chancellor, they'll be able to unravel the Weimar government and get rid of democracy, and Hitler will be able to take full charge, a complete dictatorship. All right? Now, most people didn't really take him too seriously, right? But what they did take him serious about were the brown shirts, because every time a newspaper or somebody said something bad about the Fuhrer, well, he's not called the Fuhrer yet, Adolf Hitler, it seemed like they got a brick through their window, their buildings were put on fire, their employees were beaten up and run off. So no one took this guy too seriously in the early 1930s, but they did take his thugs, the brown shirts, very seriously. And quite frankly, if they were beating up communists, who cared? All right. Now this gentleman on the left is General von Hindenburg. He's one of the greatest generals of the Great War. And now he is in charge. He is the president of Germany. And he doesn't really like Hitler. He thinks Hitler's, pardon me, it's just an upstart, and he really doesn't have a whole lot of respect for him. And, remember, Hitler is just a corporal. This guy was a field marshal. But the thing is that the Nazis, every time they don't get their way, they won't vote, and they cause a dissolution of the Reichstag. And so sometimes Germany has to have elections over and over again so they can get a full majority in the House so they can get something done. So it's just a deadlock. A little bit like American Congress today, nothing's going on in the Reichstag. And that's because Hitler will not cooperate. And he won't cooperate until you give him more power. I want to be chancellor. And Hindenburg says, yeah, fat chance. Okay. So little by little, as the Nazis became stronger and stronger, they offered a coalition government. They were hoping that like making Hitler like vice president, like chancellor, that he'd get what he wanted, they would cooperate, they would be able to pass laws and move forward, and he couldn't blackmail the Reichstag by marching out every time he didn't like what he heard. But they didn't realize something. Putting Adolf Hitler in a position that was deemed not that important, chancellor, was like letting a virus into your body. And once this virus got into the body, even though it was very small, it began to spread. And so once Hitler became chancellor, he began to unravel the government of Germany from within by legal means. But don't be fooled, guys. He wants sole power. And as we read, along and along, nothing is happening here. Democracy is not working in Germany. It's really falling apart. But slowly but surely, the Germans are getting more seats in the Reichstag. All right? And then we're going to figure out, man, that Hitler's power is beginning to grow. He goes from being a member of a party that had 17 members to now to having over 1 million. And quite frankly, the German army, which is even weaker than the American army, is rebuilding and beginning to look at Hitler as the answer to stop communism, which is becoming very popular in Germany. All right? So they do it. They figure to stop the violence of the brown shirts and to stop the walkouts in the parliament, right, that they would make Hitler chancellor. They thought it could control him. What a gigantic mistake. Because once Hitler got into that building, he began to unravel democracy through coalition votes, through terror, through blackmail, through bribes, through corruption, and even through assassination. All right, so the terror begins. The first thing Hitler does after he becomes chancellor is that he has the Nazi party members set fire to the Reichstag, one of the oldest and most important buildings in Germany. Well, they were able to pin it on a very simple-minded Dutch communist, right, Martinus de van der Lubbe, and you know what? He's going to take the fall. He's going to be found guilty. He's going to die in the guillotine. But now Hitler has the fear that he wants to spread. This is a poor analogy, but this is kind of like Germany's 9/11. A major building had been destroyed by terrorism, and now they're going to declare martial law. And that's exactly what Hitler wanted. Because once they declared martial law, they gave him the Enabling Acts, which suspended the Constitution and suspended democracy. The Reichstag was afraid that this was a communist takeover, so they gave Hitler complete power. Now, Hitler will be able to call himself the Führer. The Führer means maximum leader. That means he no longer has to answer anybody, not even President Hindenburg. He has the ability to outlaw trade unions and to dismantle all political parties and to get rid of any political opponents he wants. As a matter of fact, through the Enabling Acts, he feels so confident that now he can go after his old friend Ernst Röhm and the hundreds of brown shirt gangsters who helped Hitler in the beginning of his career, because they won't swear loyalty to him, and Hitler sees them as competing to one day take over his job. He is able to clearly assassinate the brown shirts and Ernst Röhm and explain it to the newspapers that they were wiping out a potential terror threat, the treasonous brown shirts. So Hitler now, to the Enabling Acts, becomes dictator, and he can do whatever he wants, and he's going to get away with it. And there's a picture of Ernst Röhm, the man who was with him from the beginning. He quietly turns on him. He may have murdered as many as 1,000 of the brown shirts. Remember those guys back in the beer halls who used to say we're brawling our way to greatness, who would do anything for Hitler? Well, now, this is a poor analogy, but this is kind of like a Jesus Christ Judas thing. And the Night of the Long Knives is going to place the SS, the Schutzstaffel, the black shirts, over the SA. Hitler has his Praetorian Guard. They're going to invent the Gestapo, and the Gestapo will be one of the most secret police ever created. Well, and their job basically is to make sure that no one threatens Hitler's plan to take over Germany and eventually Europe. So they are like the secret police, the CIA, right, all rolled into one. And that's going to be Hermann Göring's baby. Hermann Göring will also be the man who creates the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, in future episodes. Hermann Göring was there during the Beer Hall Putsch and was the one severely shot in the groin and turned to drugs to alleviate the suffering from that wound. And he will be a drug addict the rest of his days in the Third Reich. Someday we'll talk about that too. Right. So now he's no longer called the Chancellor. He's now called the Fuhrer, and to make matters even worse, Hindenburg is going to die shortly after the Reichstag fire at 86 years of age, and now Adolf Hitler is the law of Germany. No one can stop him. His party members are in control. He's bribed enough powerful industrialists, right? He's promised the army to rebuild. He's destroyed the Communist Party, right? He has basically crushed any Catholics who try to protest. He's shutting down everyone he thinks is a threat. And now he is the Führer, the maximum leader. Now, immediately, Hitler, once takes power, and now has the enabling acts, begins his program of persecution. Now, Hitler believed in Darwinism, survival of the fittest, and war between the races. But the thing was that Charles Darwin never talked about human beings or races. He only talked about animals and the plant kingdom. But Hitler took it one step further. This is called social Darwinism. When you take the supposed theories of evolution and you apply them to societies, and in his book, Mein Kampf, or My Struggle, that he wrote in prison, right, he believed, and this is a great test question, that the Jews were very dangerous because they were parasites. They lived off other races. They lived off other races, and because they lived off other races, they weakened them like a parasite. And the worst thing you could ever do was to marry a Jew and allow the Jewish bloodline to continue, because he believed they were on the bottom of the evolutionary cycle. They were nothing more than parasites in human form. All right. So he gets everyone to pass the Nuremberg racial laws of 1935. From this moment on, you will not buy products from Jewish businesses. Jews are no longer considered to be citizens. But Hitler, I'm a Jew, and I fought in the First World War, and I got the Iron Cross. I don't care. You know what? We don't want you here. We want everybody gone. If you're Jewish or even half Jewish, leave. Now, stripped of their jobs and property rights, right? It's like one day you wake up and you're just not wanted anywhere. Now, some Jews began to see the handwriting on the wall, and they left. Guys like Albert Einstein left because he knew what was coming next. Now, it wasn't just Hitler going after the Jews, men. He didn't like Jehovah's Witnesses. He thought that the people that were criminally insane in Germany should be liquidated. He did not believe that retarded children or physically disabled children should be allowed to live. He was afraid of their what he thought was their defective genetic structure being passed on to the next generation. He was against homosexuals because homosexuals, not because of religion, because homosexuals don't produce children. And if you don't produce children, how am I going to build an army? So why am I economically going to support a group that doesn't produce children? So he got rid of homosexuals. He got rid of the criminally insane, the physically unfit. Remember this, guys. When he opened up Dachau outside of Munich, that was only a political prison to get rid of all his enemies. It wasn't a death camp. The death camps against the Jews and others will be mostly in Poland, out of sight of the German people, because this is a secret you kind of want to keep. This picture you see here is Dachau. That's outside of Munich. That's just for people that he didn't like, political prisoners. Maybe you wrote an article that wasn't very kind, or you were a Catholic priest that preached against Hitler in the Sunday services, right? Or you were a gypsy or a homeless person. These are all political prisoners. Now, Dachau later becomes a death camp, but right now it's just a political holding cell. Now, a weird thing, man. On May 10th, 1933, Hitler ordered every single book by authors such as Albert Einstein, Sigmund Freud, Ernest Hemingway, my favorite, Helen Keller. All these books he felt to be un-German and unpure because they talked about individuality instead of dealing with the idea of a united country or a team, which he wanted Germany to be, were ordered to be destroyed and burnt. Bookstores were no longer allowed to sell these particular authors that had been blacklisted. And all over Germany, we watched the burning of the books. Kind of remind me of that book. I was young back when I was a freshman at Columbus, called Fahrenheit 451. Remember that book? Kind of remind me of that. So Hitler also hated very much jazz music. So if you were a German and you listened to jazz, which a lot of the young kids did, you could end up in Dachau. No jazz music, and don't read any books by Sigmund Freud, Ernest Hemingway, and a list of others. They're unpure. It's not German. All right? Guys, look at this, right? Remember, in the Bible, the Holocaust is when you have a burnt offering from the Old Testament. So, 40,000 students watch. Some of them are standing there going, okay, I understand. You don't like the communists. Okay, I get it. You don't like the Versailles Treaty and the fact we got our properties taken away from us. Okay. And the war guilt clause, we have to pay back. Okay. And the stab in the back, those politicians that made peace. All right, maybe I get that. But I don't want you to think that everybody enthusiastically did this. There were a lot of college students that actually hid their books because they loved their books, and they just thought that this was just craziness. So please, don't think that everybody went out there and participated, because it wasn't true. But people did begin to hide books. It became an era of censorship. The Hitler Youth. Hitler believed strongly, he loved children. He believed strongly that the future of the party depended upon brainwashing the young to get them ready to understand their positions as future soldiers and politicians in the party. And one thing that will be on the test was that Hitler insisted that all the young men learn how to use military weapons. Some of them even had glider clubs where they built and flew gliders. I mean, not little models. I mean, actually put a kid inside of it. And they had gigantic glider competitions all over Germany. And these guys later became fantastic Luftwaffe pilots with fantastic skills. Because if you can fly a glider without an engine, imagine what you can do when you have an engine. All right? And also Hitler was into this crazy idea known as the Lebensborn program. Selective breeding. Men, now these aren't racehorses, but Hitler believed that if you had the best genetic Aryans, strong, blue-eyed, intelligent, physically fit, blonde hair, the strongest women and the strongest men would produce the greatest babies. So Hitler had his new army, the SS, before they went off to fight. They would have these places, these farms, where they were asked to procreate with selected German women to produce a master race of the future. When the Americans came across these farms, these Lebensborn farms, right, they didn't know what to think of it. This was selective, primitive genetic engineering. The record's still out about that. There is no guarantee that if you put two physically fit people together, that you're going to produce a prodigy of a son or a daughter. Genetics is a science that we still don't understand completely everything about it. All right. This is Eva Braun, 24-year-old. Now, Adolf Hitler had several girlfriends, right? The rumors about him not liking women, that was British propaganda. And this woman, right, became his mistress. She was 24, and I think Hitler died at 56, all right? So he was she was 24 when they met. Hitler was in his 40s, I believe. So there was a generation gap there, but not much is known about her. She was with Hitler and never left him. In fact, the day before they both committed suicide, 50 feet below, near the Reichstag, in a bunker, as the Russian army was literally pouring into Berlin on top of him, she stayed with Hitler and committed suicide with him. But the thing was that she was in the background. You never see pictures of them on a date or in functions together, right? She's kind of like the hidden woman, and kind of like not really a partner. But Hitler insisted that everybody, especially the women, that he was married already. He was married to Germany, and that if he had a girlfriend or a wife that he paraded around, he would lose popularity with the German women and maybe even lose votes. So it was kind of a strange relationship, but the marriage did not even last 24 hours. It ended up in, a dual suicide in April of 1945. Eva Braun. Now, Hitler had no children that we know of, so he liked children, but he also said, if I end up being a prodigy and one of the greatest legends of history, how would my children possibly live up to my reputation? It would be just too much of a strain for them, so better not to have kids. All right? This is Werner von Fritz. Werner von Fritz is one of the old Bavarian commanders, Prussian trainers, and he was considered to be a fantastic general. But he was very, very afraid that Hitler was going to take complete control of the army, and he was going to use the army for what he knew Hitler was designing, a war. You see, according to the Nazi gospel, if it's survival of the fittest and evolution, then war is its natural state. Only by conquering other countries and getting Lebensraum or living space would Hitler and the German people be able to survive. Now, guys like Fritz and Blumberg, who were old generals, realized that this corporal was crazy and that he was going to drive the army into a machine of conquest. So when they tried to stop him, they drummed up charges against these guys and got them removed. They talked about the fact that these guys were dating prostitutes and that, they didn't like women. And eventually what happened here was that Hitler took complete control of the OKW, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, which means he is now not only Führer of the government, he is now the #1 Field Marshal, General, Commander of the entire German army. And they have to swear an oath to him to do whatever he tells them. And he's going to go for conquest. In Mein Kampf, he talked about taking Poland and Russia. So now it doesn't seem like anyone can stop Hitler. He's doing whatever he wants to do. And in the 1930s, everyone in England thought that Hitler was still bluffing, that Germany can never risk a war like they did after World War I, and that if you just called Hitler's bluff, he'd just fold like a house of cards. Boy, were they wrong, because that's a Stuka. And on September 1st, 1939, just like he said he was going to do, he went after Poland and triggered World War II. In fact, Hitler was actually surprised that England fought back. He thought they would just give up and let him have Poland. But you know what? England stood up, and the Second World War is now ready to begin.